The sky was the color of a healing bruise, violet streaked with ash, pressed low over the plains like it wanted to bury everything beneath it. Frank Hollis rode through the dusk with nothing but the wind and the creak of leather for company. Dust coated his boots, his coat, the stubble on his jaw. It had been 3 days since he last spoke a word. Longer still since he'd had a reason to. He passed a small wooden cross stabbed into the earth, no name, just a ribbon of faded blue fluttering from its splintered neck. He slowed, stared, then rode on. Some things were better left unremembered. The town came into view around a bend, rising from the prairie like a scar. Crooked buildings hunched together, smoke curling lazy from a few chimneys. A crooked sign swaying outside the saloon that read Hollow Point. The name felt too fitting. Frank dismounted and tied his horse to a post that looked ready to collapse. The animal snorted but didn't complain. It was too tired to. He walked through the town square, eyes low. Locals watched from under brims, behind curtains, over raised poker hands. He was the kind of man people noticed but didn't talk to, a man with too many shadows trailing him. Outside the general store, a weathered notice flapped on a rusted board. He turned, catching a glimpse. Auction, one bride. Young, fertile, sound health. With child. Payment negotiable. A silence filled him, deep and cold. Frank kept walking. He found the saloon just past the livery, pushed through the doors, and stepped into the stink of stale beer and bad bets. A few heads turned. Most went back to their cards. He ordered whiskey. No one asked questions. He drank it in one throw. Outside, the church bell clanged twice, sharp, urgent. Something was happening. Someone wanted a crowd. He stepped back into the street, drawn like a man to a fire he knew would burn him. People were gathering near the courthouse, voices rising in cruel laughter and curious chatter. A platform had been thrown together from barrels and crates. On it stood a young woman, pregnant, barefoot, chin-high despite the shame being heaped on her. 2 men flanked her, older, mean-looking, with tobacco-stained teeth and spittle in their beards. One of them shouted, "She's a hard worker. Strong back, clean blood. Carries a child 6 months gone, comes with no obligations except feed in her." The crowd laughed. A few men stepped closer, eyes greedy. Frank didn't move. The woman didn't cry. That struck him first. She stood with her hands folded over her belly, a calm defiance in her eyes that didn't match the dirt on her skin or the bruises on her wrists. Her hair, once pinned, had fallen loose. She looked maybe 20, no older. Another man in the crowd called out, "What'll she do once the baby comes? Sit around sucking coin for milk she don't earn." One of the in-laws laughed. "That's the buyer's problem." The woman flinched but didn't break. Frank stepped forward. He hadn't planned to. His boots just moved as though they had something to say before he did. "I'll marry her," he said, his voice low and hoarse from whiskey and disuse. A hush fell like thunder. All eyes turned. The in-law squinted. "Beg pardon. I said, I'll marry her. Today." He reached into his coat and pulled out a gold coin, one of the last. He tossed it to the man with the tobacco teeth. The coin hit the ground with a hard chime. That enough to shut your mouth? Murmurs rippled through the crowd. One woman gasped. A drunk man laughed and clapped. The younger in-law, skinny and red-faced, spat, "You can't just, she's family property till the ink dries." Frank's hand twitched near his belt. The man fell silent. "She ain't property," Frank said. "And she's not staying with you." The woman stared at him, eyes wide but unreadable. A preacher was dragged into the scene, half-dressed and grumbling. Someone pressed a Bible into his hands. The crowd closed in, tight. Frank looked at the girl. She hadn't said a word. "You got a name?" he asked. "Eliza," she said softly. "Eliza Maywood." He nodded once. "Frank Hollis." The preacher cleared his throat. "Do you, Frank Hollis, take?" "Do it quick," Frank growled. The words passed like smoke. Rings were improvised. A string from Frank's thil bag became Eliza's wedding band. When the preacher said, "You may kiss the bride," Frank tipped his hat to her instead. They walked away together, him leading the horse, her holding her stomach as though it were the only thing she had left. Behind them, the crowd erupted in speculation. A few bets were placed on how long the marriage would last. One man whispered, "Ain't no good come from a man that desperate." Frank ignored them all. At the edge of town, they stopped. She looked up at him for the first time. "Why?" she asked. He didn't look at her, just stared out at the road ahead, dry and endless. "Because I got nothing left to lose," he said. He helped her onto the saddle, then climbed up behind. The horse shifted under their weight. They rode into the dusk together, the last light of day stretching their shadows long across the prairie. Frank didn't know what tomorrow held. But for the first time in a long time, he had someone beside him. And that meant the road, no matter how cruel, might just lead somewhere worth going. The prairie rolled out ahead of them in brown and gold, rippling like a sea of dry fire. The sun was high now, sharp and merciless, and the dust clung to everything, clothes, lungs, skin. Eliza sat stiff in the saddle, hands clasped over her belly, trying to ignore the ache in her back. Frank rode silently behind her, reins in one hand, his rifle strapped across the saddle horn. They'd ridden for hours without speaking. Silence stretched between them like a rope, tense, untested. She glanced over her shoulder. "How far until we stop?" "Another hour, maybe two. There's a stream west of the ridge. Horse needs water." She nodded, then looked ahead again. Her lips were cracked. Her stomach growled softly, but she said nothing. Pride or habit, maybe both. By the time they reached the stream, her legs were numb and Frank's shirt was soaked through with sweat. He helped her down wordlessly, his hand firm at her waist but careful, like she was glass. She winced as her boots touched the ground. "You all right?" She straightened. "Yes." He didn't press, just led the horse to drink while she knelt by the water, cupping it to her face, her eyes fluttering closed. The cold bit at her skin, shocking and sweet. A rabbit darted from the brush, and she jumped. Frank looked up, one hand near his hip. "Just a rabbit." "Skittish," she muttered, half to herself. "Aren't we all?" he replied. She looked at him then, really looked. There were lines in his face that didn't come from age. Scars on his knuckles. Something behind the eyes not quite broken, but close. "Why were you in Hollow Point?" she asked after a while. He shrugged. "Nowhere else to be. Wasn't looking to marry. Wasn't looking to breathe." She didn't know how to answer that. That night, they made camp beneath a crooked cedar. He laid his bedroll out, then hers a few feet apart. She sat by the fire, trying not to notice the way her ankles had swollen, the heaviness of her belly. "You lost someone," she said quietly, not a question. "Yeah? Your wife?" He nodded once. 2 years ago. She was expecting. Didn't make it. Neither did the boy. The fire crackled between them. The shadows on his face made him look older. "I'm sorry," she said, and meant it. He said nothing for a long time, then added, "Wasn't your fault." "I didn't say it was." He glanced at her. There was the faintest hint of a smile, not kind, not cruel, just surprised. Later, as they lay in their separate bedrolls, she stared at the sky, wide and black and heavy with stars. "What happens now?" she asked the dark. "We ride. Find work, maybe land. You'll keep me. I married you, didn't I? That doesn't mean much out here." His voice came, quiet but steady. "It does to me." She closed her eyes and, for the first time in weeks, drifted to sleep without crying. At dawn, the wind shifted. Frank was already awake, checking the saddle, scanning the horizon. "Something's off," he said, crouching near her. "Eliza. Pack up. Quick." She sat up, groggy. "What is it?" "Dust trail. Riders. Can't tell how many. They broke camp in minutes." Frank helped her mount, then swung up behind. They cut north through tall grass and dry gulches, riding hard but smart. Just fast enough to stay ahead, not so fast they'd burn out the horse. By noon, the sound of hoofbeats echoed behind them. "Bandits?" she asked. Could be. Could be worse." He loaded his rifle, handed her a small revolver. "Know how to use it?" She took it with shaking hands. "No." "Point. Squeeze. Don't hesitate." They reached a narrow ravine, dry as bone. Frank pulled the horse behind a boulder, crouched low, rifle ready. He motioned for Eliza to stay back, silent. Moments later, 2 riders appeared over the ridge. Lean men, ragged, eyes mean. One carried a rusted shotgun across his lap. Frank waited. The men slowed near the stream bed, scanning for signs. One dismounted. He knelt near the tracks, cursed, then stood. Frank fired. The first man dropped like a sack of grain. The other scrambled, raising his shotgun, firing wild. Dust flew. Eliza screamed. Frank rolled. Shot again. Silence followed. The second man lay still, blood soaking into the sand. Frank stood slowly, breath heavy. "Come on. We move." Eliza followed, face pale, clutching her belly. They rode until dusk, until the world was nothing but streaks of orange and red and the wind began to cool. That night, Frank tended to his horse's hooves, then cleaned his rifle with methodical care. Eliza sat cross-legged near the fire, cradling a cup of tea he'd boiled from some bitter root. She finally asked, "Is this what it's going to be like? Running, hiding, killing?" He looked at her. "It's the West. It don't care what you want. I don't want to bring a child into this." He said nothing for a long moment, then, softly, "Neither did I. But life don't ask permission." She stared at the flames. "You saved me." "Maybe." "Why?" He wiped the barrel clean, set the rifle aside. "Because I didn't save the last one." She didn't know what to say to that. Later, as she lay beneath the stars, Eliza whispered, "I wasn't loved. My husband, he didn't marry me for who I was, just the dowry. When he died, his folks blamed me. Called me a burden. Said I'd eat their future." Frank, already half asleep, murmured they were wrong. "I tried to run once," she said, her voice breaking. "His father locked me in the cellar. Said no man would ever want a used-up girl with a bastard on the way." She thought he'd fallen asleep, but his voice came, clear through the dark. "He ain't a man. And that child ain't a bastard." She stared at the sky, breath caught in her throat. They traveled slower the next day. Eliza's legs ached from the saddle, and Frank didn't push her. They stopped before sundown near a canyon rim, a good place to rest. Safe, quiet. She smiled for the first time since leaving town. He raised an eyebrow. "What?" "I was just thinking," she said. "If I go into labor out here, are you going to catch the baby?" He frowned. "I can shoot a man between the eyes at 50 paces. But I don't know the first thing about babies." She laughed. "Good thing I do." He grunted, amused despite himself. "That's supposed to be funny." "A little." They shared a quiet meal. Beans, hard bread, water boiled down to almost nothing. As the stars returned, Frank leaned back against a rock, staring at the sky. "You think they know?" she asked. "Who?" "The stars." "About us?" "About this road, where it leads." He didn't answer right away, just looked up at the endless sprawl of night. "They don't care," he said. "But they are watching, all the same." Far in the distance, a flicker of movement, a dust trail rising faintly into the dusk, nearly invisible. Someone was following them. Frank didn't tell her. Not yet. The first storm came 3 days later. It wasn't thunder or lightning that struck first. It was wind, hot and sharp as a whip, howling down from the hills like something alive. The skies turned the color of rust, and dust rolled across the plains in a great, choking wave. Frank felt it in his bones before he saw it. His gut tightened. He reined the horse in, pulled Eliza's. They pushed hard, the horse straining, Eliza clinging tight behind him. Grit scraped her eyes and stung her throat. Her belly felt heavier than ever, like it might drag her off the saddle. She could barely breathe. When they finally reached the shelter of a rock face, Frank dismounted and helped her down, half lifting her into a shallow crevice. Dust swirled like smoke outside, turning day to a blood-colored dusk. He drove a blanket into the gap to block the wind and sat beside her, every muscle tight. She coughed and leaned into him. "Is this normal?" No. Not this early in the season. He stared out through the narrow opening. Storm's chasing something. Or someone. She didn't ask what. They huddled there for hours. The world outside raged like it meant to wipe them clean off it. When it finally passed, silence dropped, heavy, broken only by the whistle of wind through cracked stone. They emerged blinking, coated in fine dust, the land looking like some scorched, otherworldly place. The trail behind them had vanished. The one ahead, no clearer. Eliza bent over, holding her stomach. Frank's eyes narrowed. Pain. She nodded, tight. Just for a second. He helped her sit, his jaw clenched. You think the babe is coming? No, she said. Not yet. Just false pains. I know what they are. You sure? She gave him a look. I've carried this far alone. I know my own body. Frank nodded. He didn't argue. They camped low that night in a dry gulch under crooked cottonwoods. He built a fire carefully, watching the sky for more signs. Eliza rested against the tree, eyes closed. Her lips moved in a whisper. You praying? He asked. Talking to her. Huh? She touched her belly. Feels like a girl. Don't know how. I just feel it. He stirred the fire. Got a name? Not yet. He glanced at her. My wife, she wanted to name ours Josephine. Said it sounded strong. Eliza smiled faintly. It does. He didn't say more. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of what could have been. 2 days later, they found a trading post, barely a leaner with a crooked sign and a man who smelled like spoiled meat. He eyed Eliza too long. Frank kept his hand near his gun the entire time. They traded a spare blanket for dried meat and ammunition. Frank asked about nearby towns. Nearest is Dry Cedar, 3 days east. Not much there except cattle and dust. You ain't the first riding through, either. Frank paused. Who else? Couple men, maybe more. Looked like bounty hunters. Mean types. Didn't talk much. Asked about a girl with a belly. Frank's pulse thudded. He tipped his hat, muttered, thanks, and got them moving again. They rode until the moon was high. Eliza said nothing, but her hands trembled when she dismounted. She was tired, bone-deep tired, and he could see it. You need rest, he said. We don't have time. He crouched beside her. I need you strong when it's time. Can't protect you and deliver a baby in the same hour. She exhaled slowly, the fight draining from her. He helped her onto the bedroll, wrapped her in his coat. That night, he didn't sleep. He watched the shadows dance on the trees, rifle across his lap. He saw movement once, too far to tell if it was man or beast, but he didn't blink until dawn cracked pink across the sky. They reached Dry Cedar by midday. It was a ghost town in everything but name. Half the buildings were abandoned, the saloon boarded up, the church missing a roof. But there were people here, farmers, quiet folk. A widow named Mabel gave them stew and pointed them toward an empty shack on the edge of town. No questions, she said, handing Eliza a blanket. But you keep that baby quiet come nightfall. Things been stirring in the dark lately. The shack was cold and rough, but dry. Frank rigged a lock on the door, blocked the window with crates. Eliza lay down and didn't rise for an hour. He sat outside on a stump, watching the path. His hands didn't shake, but his soul did. That night, footsteps. Soft, cautious. Then the scratch of a boot on loose gravel. Frank moved like smoke, quiet, swift, rifle aimed before the figure fully emerged from the dark. A man stepped into moonlight, thin, smiling, hat low. His coat flared slightly at the hip, enough to show the glint of a revolver. "Evening," the man drawled. "Don't suppose you're the one married that girl out of Hollow Point?" "Who's asking?" "Name's Harlan. You might say her in-laws put up a bounty. Call it a retrieval fee. She ain't yours to take. Law says different." "I ain't seen the law this side of 100 miles. Harlan grinned. "Then it won't mind if I collect." The shot rang sharp and clean. Frank's bullet caught the man's shoulder, spinning him down into the dirt. The revolver clattered. Frank was on him in seconds, boot on the wounded arm, rifle raised. Harlan wheezed, "You going to kill me?" "No," Frank said. "But I'll make sure you walk back bloody." And he did. At dawn, he burned the bounty notice they found in Harlan's coat. Eliza watched the flames. "They'll keep coming." "I know." She reached for his hand. "Then don't run." He looked at her, surprised. "We find a place," she said. "We make a stand. I won't bring her into a life of running and fear." His throat worked around words he hadn't said in years. He nodded. They spent that day reinforcing the shack, boards over windows, extra nails in the door. Frank dug a trench for water runoff, then set snares around the edge of the yard. The next morning, Eliza didn't rise. He found her curled on the bed, hands clenched over her belly, face pale and slick with sweat. "It's time," she gasped. And the storm returned. The contractions came fast, sharp, like lightning strikes splitting her spine. Eliza gripped the edge of the cot, her knuckles white, sweat running down her face in rivers. Frank moved around the room like a man possessed, boiling water, tearing cloth, building a nest of blankets. Fear clung to him heavier than his sweat, but his hands stayed steady. She screamed once, loud and raw, and he dropped the basin, rushing to her side. "I can't," she gasped. "I can't do it." "Yes, you can," he said, his voice low and sure. "You've come too far to quit now." Her eyes locked on his, wild with pain and terror. "If something happens—" "Don't say it," he cut in. "You hear me? Don't." She bit her lip until it bled. Another wave hit. She cried out, clawing at the mattress. He supported her back, whispering steady, grounding words she barely heard. Outside, thunder growled, low, distant, but coming. Hours passed. The storm outside climbed, rain slashing the earth, wind howling through every crack and seam. But inside that shack, another storm raged harder. Frank had never felt so helpless. All his strength, all his grit, and none of it meant a damn thing here. "Push," he said. "Just one more." She screamed again, and then silence. A single, thin cry cut through the roar of the storm. Frank stared down at the tiny form in his hands, slick, red, wriggling, and for a moment, he forgot to breathe. He didn't cry, didn't smile, just stared like he'd seen God himself. Then he wrapped the child in a clean cloth and placed her gently in Eliza's arms. "She's here," he said hoarsely. "You did it." Eliza sobbed, one hand cradling the baby, the other clinging to his shirt. "Is she?" "She's perfect." The baby squawked again, fierce and alive. Outside, the rain slowed to a patter. They didn't name her right away. The moment was too big for words. Eliza slept like the dead. Frank sat with the rifle across his lap, the baby bundled in his arms. He never looked away from the door. Not once. At dawn, he stepped out onto the porch. The sky had cleared. The land was still soaked, glistening under the early sun. But there were tracks in the mud. Hoofprints for maybe 5 riders. They'd come close, real close, but hadn't approached the shack. He knew why. They were waiting. He found Mabel at the edge of town, sharpening a knife. "You saw them?" he asked. She nodded. "Watched them ride in last night. Didn't make for the house, though. Looked like they were casing. Professional types. How long before they come back?" "Soon as the storm dries out." Frank looked toward the horizon. "I need help." She wiped her blade clean. "Thought you'd never ask." That evening, a quiet army took shape. Farmers, a half-blind veteran who still shot straighter than most, Mabel with her shotgun, and 2 mean-looking dogs. They built barricades out of overturned wagons, reinforced the shack's porch with planks and nails. No one asked who Eliza was. No one asked what the baby meant to Frank. They just worked. Inside, Eliza stirred weakly. Her face was pale, but her eyes were clear. "They are coming, aren't they?" she whispered. "Yeah. You should run." "I've been running half my life." "Not anymore." He kissed her forehead gently, then looked down at the baby sleeping in her arms. "She looks like you," he said. "She has your frown." They shared a weak laugh. Before he left, she grabbed his hand. "Her name is Josephine." Frank froze, his throat tightened. "She deserves a strong name," Eliza said softly. "And I think you deserve a second chance." The sun set in fire and gold. Then night fell like a curtain. The riders came just after dark. 5 of them, moving slow and confident, guns drawn, faces hidden under wide hats and long coats. They spread out at the edge of town, assuming no one would stand in their way. Frank stepped into the open, rifle in hand. "This is your only warning," he called. "Turn around." Laughter from the leader. "You got no say in this, mister. That girl and her brat belong to someone else." Frank didn't blink. "She belongs to herself." Then the world exploded. Gunfire cracked like thunder. Flames lit the shadows. Mabel's dogs tore into one rider before he could draw. Another dropped when the veteran fired from the roof of the saloon, his shot clean and final. Frank moved like he was part of the wind, fast, brutal, relentless. He shot one man through the thigh, then cracked the butt of his rifle across another's jaw. Blood sprayed, screams echoed, but he wasn't invincible. A bullet clipped his shoulder, spun him backward into the mud. He gasped, the pain sharp and biting. Another rider charged toward the shack. Frank roared, pulled his knife, and slammed it into the man's side before he reached the door. Then silence. Smoke curled in the air. Rain began again, soft and forgiving. Frank stood, breath ragged, mud-coated, bleeding, but upright. He turned and saw Eliza standing in the doorway, Josephine swaddled against her chest. She looked like a ghost, like a goddess, pale, exhausted, radiant. She stepped forward. He met her halfway. "You stayed," she whispered. He touched her face, bloody fingers trembling. "I found something worth staying for." The townsfolk gathered slowly, eyes wide, mouths slack. The threat was gone, for now. Frank didn't care. He looked at the baby, at Josephine, and something inside him settled for the first time in years. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He was living. And as the sun rose again over the broken plains, gold streaking across the wet earth, Frank Hollis held his family in his arms and finally understood what it meant to come home.